The classroom buzzed with soft hums of luminescent panels, the glow casting shifting colors on the smooth metallic walls. Dozens of eyes, some round, some slitted, a few faceted like gemstones, turned toward the doorway as it slid open with a gentle hiss. Silence blanketed the room. There he stood, a human. He was shorter than most of them, clad in the rigid fabric of earthling uniforms. His hair, dark and unruly, contrasted with the sleek exoskeletons, scaled hides, and gelatinous forms of his new classmates. His breathing, visibly rhythmic, was a curiosity all on its own. For a moment no one spoke. Even Mr. Draxel, the instructor, tilted his triangular head in quiet calculation. Finally, with a click of his mandibles, he gestured toward the front. "Class, this is Elias. He will be joining us for the remainder of the cycle. Earth species, human. Please extend courtesy." The pause before courtesy was not lost on Elias. He'd read enough about interspecies etiquette to know that courtesy could mean 100 different things depending on the planet. "Hello," Elias said, raising his hand in a stiff wave. His voice sounded too sharp, too raw in the air, as if it wasn't supposed to exist here. He shuffled toward the only empty seat near the back of the room, feeling the weight of every gaze. The glances weren't overtly hostile, but they were far from welcoming. For the first few weeks, that's how it remained. No one spoke to him unless required. Classmates whispered in frequencies his ears couldn't pick up. The assignments were confusing, and the logic of alien mathematics made him feel like a toddler learning to walk. Worse, he couldn't shake the sense that the whole school saw him as a primitive creature, barely more than a clever animal. Then it happened. During a physics lab, Elias noticed a mistake in the formula for inertia-based drift corrections on a simulated Starship flight path. It was subtle, a miscalculation in gravitational lag. Most of his classmates relied on their neural interfaces, letting their brains be guided by pre-programmed logic. But Elias didn't have that luxury. His mind worked the old-fashioned way, tracing connections, cross-referencing ideas. He saw the flaw instantly. That's not right," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. But Kalara, a crystalline being with a body like a walking geode, swiveled toward him, her voice echoing in that soft, harmonic hum. "Clarify." Elias hesitated. "The trajectory's off. The mass differential of the star changes the gravitational pull over time, not all at once." The room went quiet. Mr. Draxel stopped mid-lecture and turned, his 6 eyes blinking in slow sequence. Elaborate, human. Elias felt his heart pound, but he leaned forward, tapping on the display. "Look, the system's treating it like the pull is instant, but it's gradual. It's small, but over millions of kilometers it adds up." For a moment no one spoke. Mr. Draxel tilted his head again in that slow, deliberate way that signaled deep processing. "Correct. The computational matrix was incomplete." The class murmured. Not whispered, murmured aloud. Elias had seen it before in schools on Earth. It was the sound of respect growing in real time. The next day, Kalara sat next to him. Her crystalline fingers tapped the desk in a rhythm, and she glanced at him with her many-faceted eyes. "Show me how you knew." It wasn't the only time. More students started asking him questions. It started small explanations of human problem-solving, logic puzzles, and his strange, linear way of thinking. His brain, it seemed, was unpredictable to them. While they relied on precise algorithms and direct connections, Elias had learned to approach problems sideways, seeing patterns in the chaos. By the 3rd month, his name wasn't the human anymore. It was just Elias. He didn't change everything all at once. There was no sudden shift where he became a celebrity or a hero. It was gradual, like the gravitational pull he'd corrected in that simulation. Slowly but surely, they stopped underestimating him. One day, after a particularly grueling exam, Elias sat with Kalara and a few others, a soft-bodied Lormec named Vax, an insectal Variael called Zetril, and Jero, a furred, quadrupedal Tralaxian. They sat on the open terrace of the school, watching the swirling gas clouds of a nearby nebula shift colors. Jero glanced at him with two of his 4 eyes. "Humans are strange," he said, not unkindly. "Yeah," Elias replied, grinning. "We get that a lot." As the weeks passed, Elias's influence on the school grew in ways even he didn't fully realize. It wasn't just his ability to spot errors or his knack for thinking outside the bounds of logic. It was his willingness to question why things were done a certain way. One day, during a lesson on multidimensional spatial folding, Mr. Draxel presented a problem to the class. It was a theoretical scenario involving the folding of a 6-dimensional space into a 4-dimensional bridge, a concept that most of the students approached with the rigid logic they'd been trained to use. Standard procedure dictates an inverse synchronization of dimensional resonance, Mr. Draxel said, tapping the display with a chitinous claw. Calculate the required energy to complete the fold. The students' neural interfaces buzzed with the silent hum of data transfers. Most of them leaned back, letting the implants run the calculations. But Elias, still unconnected to the school's network, had to do it all by hand. He furrowed his brow, eyes darting across the screen. "Why do it like that?" he asked suddenly, his voice breaking the soft hum of computation. The room went still. Again, Zetril's antennae twitched. "Because it works. But does it have to?" Elias shot back, glancing around the room. "You're treating the space like it's solid, like folding paper, but it's not. It's fluid. You could slide it instead of folding it." The moment he said it, Kalara's crystalline eyes shifted hues, a ripple of soft purples and blues coursing through her body. She tilted her head, fingers tapping at her own interface. "Slide instead of fold." "It's possible," Vax said, his gelatinous body pulsing with yellow-orange ripples of surprise. "Lower energy cost." "Much lower," Kalara added, her voice resonating like a chime. "He's right. Calculating." "Not possible," Mr. Draxel declared at first, but there was hesitation in his tone. His 6 eyes narrowed as he approached the display. His fingers moved faster than any human hand, his claws tapping out inputs. For several tense moments, the only sounds were the soft beeps of computation and the faint rustle of shifting bodies. Then Mr. Draxel's mandibles twitched. His eyes widened. "Correction confirmed," he said slowly, like each word was a weight he had to carry. "Dimensional slide reduces energy expenditure by 23.7%. The class went wild. Not in the way a human school might erupt into cheers, but in their own alien ways. Zetril's wings buzzed rapidly, filling the room with a low hum. Vax's body shifted to a bright, vibrant green, a color Elias had learned to recognize as excitement. Kalara's crystalline glow intensified, flashing in brilliant ultraviolet that Elias couldn't see but knew was there. No one called him human that day. They called him Elias. Later that evening, Kalara approached him in the cafeteria. She didn't sit at his table at first, only hovered nearby, her multifaceted eyes reflecting 1,000 versions of him back at himself. "May I join you?" she asked. "Yeah, of course," he said, shifting his tray to give her space. He had no idea why he did it. She didn't even use a tray. Her crystalline body didn't consume food the same way his did. But the gesture seemed to matter. She sat, folding her legs beneath her, the crystal joints clicking softly. "Why did you question the fold?" she asked, tapping her fingers together in a rhythmic pattern Elias had come to recognize as curiosity. He thought for a moment. "Because I didn't know any better." "Explain." "Where I'm from, If you don't know the rules, you can break them without meaning to, he said with a grin. No one ever told me you had to fold space that way, so I figured, why not try something else? Clara tilted her head, considering his words. Not knowing can be an advantage? Sometimes, he shrugged. Sometimes ignorance is freedom. She sat in silence for a moment. Her crystalline face didn't move, but her glow shifted to a soft, pulsing sigh in deep thought. The next week, something extraordinary happened. During a routine history lesson on interstellar diplomacy, Mr. Draxel posed a moral question. It was the kind of abstract thought experiment designed to test reasoning and ethical analysis. Two civilizations, Mr. Draxel explained, his mandibles clicking slowly. 1. A technologically superior species that requires vast amounts of natural resources to sustain its energy network. The other, a primitive pre-spaceflight civilization inhabiting a resource-rich world. Is it permissible for the superior species to claim the planet's resources for survival? The classroom fell into a familiar rhythm. The neural interfaces buzzed as each student connected with historical archives and processed ancient rulings from the galactic consensus. The answers were nearly uniform. The consensus allows for planetary reclamation under Resource Priority Clause 7-12A, Zetral said, his voice sharp and direct. As long as the primitive species are unharmed, relocation is allowed. Correct, Vax added, his body flashing blue with certainty. Historical precedent established during the Zorith Prelux dispute of Cycle 481. Affirmed, Clara nodded. Ethical analysis consistent with consensus law. Mr. Draxel clicked his mandibles in approval. Well reasoned, class. Elias raised his hand. All 6 of Mr. Draxel's eyes swiveled toward him. He tilted his head. Yes, Elias? Would it be okay if the primitive species did it to us? Elias asked, eyes locked on Mr. Draxel. The buzz of neural interfaces stopped. Silence. No one spoke. No one moved. Vax's vibrant green dimmed to a pale gray. Zetral's antennae lowered. Clara tilted her head but said nothing. Even Mr. Draxel didn't answer right away. His 6 eyes blinked, one at a time, his claws tapping on the metal podium. Hypothetical scenarios are not intended to be reversed, Mr. Draxel said at last. The power imbalance defines the ethics. Yeah, but you didn't answer the question, Elias pressed, his voice unwavering. If some stronger species came and claimed our planet, took our resources, and told us it was for their survival, would we just let them? More silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Consensus would classify such actions as aggressive. Clara admitted slowly, her crystalline glow shifting to an uneasy gray. Unethical, Zetral said, his voice quieter than usual. His wings twitched. Violations of sapient dignity. Then why is it okay if we do it to them? Elias asked. If strength makes it right, what happens when someone stronger shows up? No one answered. Not Mr. Draxel. Not Zetral. Not Clara. Vax changed color again. A deep, pensive purple. That was the moment everything changed. Not just for the classroom. Not just for Mr. Draxel or Clara. It was the first time they realized something about humans that wasn't written in the archives. Humans didn't just follow logic. They didn't just calculate paths of least resistance. They asked why. They asked it even when it didn't benefit them. Even when it was inconvenient. Even when it made everyone uncomfortable. Months later, Elias sat on the school's observation deck, watching the stars drift by. Clara sat next to him, her glow a calm, steady blue. Zetral asked me about the human concept of revolution today, she said, gazing at him with all her faceted eyes. I think you may have started one. Revolution's a strong word, Elias said with a grin. I just asked some questions. Questions that no one else was asking, she replied, her voice soft and melodic. And now they are. Elias leaned back, watching the stars. He thought about Earth, about how, back home, he wasn't all that special. Just another kid. But here, in a school of logic-driven minds and consensus-bound thinking, he was something different. Not better, not smarter, just different. And sometimes that was enough to change everything. The changes were subtle at first. Small shifts in the way his classmates approached problems, little flickers of doubt in places where certainty had reigned for centuries. No one mentioned it directly, but Elias could feel it, like the way the air changes before a storm. It wasn't just Clara or Vax anymore. Even Zetral, who had once scoffed at Elias for being unrefined, started pausing during problem-solving sessions. His antennae would twitch more frequently, his multifaceted eyes flickering in that pattern of active reconsideration Elias had learned to recognize. The shift became undeniable during one of Mr. Draxel's more advanced lessons on temporal causality loops. It was supposed to be a simple analysis of predetermined outcomes. If an event in the past could influence an event in the future, but the future event causes the past event to occur, then logic dictated that certain actions were fixed, locked in a causal loop. The galactic consensus treated it as a universal truth. Time loops are stable, Mr. Draxel explained, tapping at a glowing sphere that displayed a circular timeline. They maintain themselves. You cannot change an event in a loop. It is an inevitability. The students watched intently, their neural links processing the data and history of famous causal loops throughout the known galaxy. One by one, they agreed. Confirmed, Clara said, her glow flickering in steady agreement. Consensus upheld, Zetral added. Temporal rigidity remains unchallenged. Vax's voice chimed in. Elias frowned. How do we know? He asked, leaning forward. Mr. Draxel froze. Not literally, but all 6 of his eyes turned on Elias in perfect synchronization. His clawed fingers halted mid-air, still hovering over the display. Clarify your question, Elias, Mr. Draxel said. His voice slow and deliberate. Elias tapped the edge of his desk. How do we know the loop is unchangeable? Has anyone tried to change it? Not theorized. Tried. Actually gone back and done something different. It would be paradoxical, Mr. Draxel replied, his voice taking on that tone of patient instruction adults use on children. The paradox itself is proof of its impossibility. That's just assuming it's impossible, Elias argued. But how do we know? What if it's only impossible because no one's ever tried the right way? You're treating it like it's a physical law, but if nobody's ever broken it, how do we know it can't be broken? A week later, the administration summoned Mr. Draxel. No one knew exactly why, but whispers spread like wildfire. Clara heard from an upper-cycle student that one of Mr. Draxel's lesson logs had been flagged for unorthodox ethical inquiries. Another rumor claimed that Elias's comments had triggered a review from the Interstellar Education Commission. Zetral approached Elias at lunch. His wings buzzed as he folded his legs beneath him on the floating stool. You destabilized him, Zetral said bluntly, his antennae vibrating with accusation. The instructor. He's never been flagged before. I asked a question, Elias replied, biting into the nutrient bar on his tray. Your questions make people doubt, Zetral pressed, his wings twitching faster. Doubt leads to inefficiency. Inefficiency leads to chaos. Or it leads to change, Elias said, his voice calm but firm. Depends on what you're afraid of. Zetral didn't respond. His antennae twitched, his gaze lingering on Elias for longer than usual before he stood and buzzed away. The true shift came 3 cycles later during the collaboration trials. a school-wide event where students from different species were paired to solve large-scale simulated crises. It was meant to test leadership, problem-solving, and cooperative logic. Elias was paired with Kalara and Vax. Their task: stabilize a runaway fusion core at a simulated energy station before it reached critical detonation. Most teams followed standard procedure: isolate the core, drain excess energy, and reinforce containment. Everyone knew this procedure. It had been drilled into them since primary education. But something wasn't adding up. "We don't have enough time to drain it," Kalara said, her glow flickering red with urgency. "Energy surge will breach containment. Then we vent the plasma," Vax suggested, his body pulsating in anxious yellow. "Redirect it into the coolant chamber." "That's what they want us to do," Elias said, his eyes scanning the emergency interface. His fingers hovered over the screen, his mind working faster than his hands. "But that's the wrong play." "What?" Kalara's glow flickered. "Explain." "Vent it and we lose energy reserves. It's the same pattern they've used in every trial scenario. They expect us to pick that option." Elias's eyes narrowed. "But if we overload the stabilizers intentionally, the feedback loop will reset the fusion reaction." "That is reckless," Kalara said, her glow surging bright red. "If the stabilizers fail, we lose everything." "Yeah, or we win in half the time," Elias said, fingers already moving across the interface. "The risk is why they won't expect it. No one's willing to break the pattern." "Reckless," Kalara repeated, but she didn't stop him. Her glow flickered between red and blue, doubt and calculation. "Trust me," Elias said, glancing back at them. They did. The system roared. Warning sirens blared. Lights flashed amber and red, signaling system instability. The other teams stopped, their eyes wide as they watched the chaotic display on the main monitor. Some gasped. Others stared, transfixed. "Stabilizer failure imminent," the system declared in a mechanical, monotonous voice. "Now!" Elias shouted, fingers slamming the final sequence. "Override everything." Kalara's glow flared white. Vax vibrated with shock, his form twisting as he braced for disaster. But the disaster never came. The lights dimmed, the alarm silenced. The fusion core's status light shifted from crimson red to soft, stable blue. The display updated. Simulation complete. Total resolution 54% faster than class average. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Mr. Draxel's voice echoed from the intercom. "Elias, Kalara, Vax. Report to the head administrator's office immediately." They sat in the waiting chamber, silent. Kalara's glow remained a steady, unreadable gray. Vax had shrunk into a small, rounded shape like a deflated balloon. "Are we in trouble?" Vax whispered. "Probably," Elias muttered, leaning back against the cold, metallic wall. The doors hissed open and a figure entered. It wasn't the head administrator. It was someone unfamiliar. Their form was a flowing cloak of silver threads with no visible face. But when it spoke, it did so with authority. "You've caught the attention of the consensus watchers," it said, its voice both singular and collective. "Do you understand what that means, Elias of Earth?" Elias sat up straighter. "Not really, but I'm guessing it's a big deal." "It is," the watcher said. It leaned forward, the silver threads shifting like liquid metal. "You are disruptive, irregular, unstable." "Yeah," Elias said, meeting its unseen gaze. "But I get results." The silver threads shifted. "Indeed." There was a long pause. Then the watcher spoke again. "Tell me, human," it asked, voice filled with cold, careful curiosity. "If you were given the chance to rewrite the rules of causality, would you?" Elias leaned forward, eyes sharp as ever. "Absolutely," he said, his grin slow but certain. "I'd make them better,